Hello everyone, straight from Brazil to the world, you are on the Boosted Man channel. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos.
Have you ever felt like you were building something new with a woman, only to realize she was still keeping the door slightly open to her past? You offered your presence, your time, your energy, but suddenly, you saw her running back to her ex. The feeling is devastating. It's not just about rejection, it's about the silent blow of realizing that, in her heart, you were never the destination, only the layover between two flights. This wound touches a man's most primal fear. Not being enough, not being remembered, being nothing more than a temporary shadow, erased the moment the pull of the past calls her back. It's like giving your all in battle, only to discover that the real enemy isn't the other man, but the invisible bond she still carries inside. Carl Jung once said that what is not made conscious returns as fate. When she goes back to her ex, it's not just a romantic choice, it's the unconscious expression of something unresolved, something binding her to repetitive cycles. And without realizing it, you walk into this emotional theater not as the protagonist, but as the supporting role. The most painful part is that this doesn't happen because you lack value. It happens because there's a deeply rooted psycho-emotional chemistry that ties many women to their past. Explosive fights, violent breakups, passionate reconciliations, all of these create a biochemical addiction to extreme emotions. Dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol, substances that lock the mind and body into a cycle of dependency. The ex isn't just a man, he's the drug, and when she feels bored, insecure, or emotionally unstable, it's to that source of stimulation her body demands to return. But here's the truth most men don't understand. What hurts you isn't her ex. It's the realization that she didn't see you as unique. It's the echo of the fear of being replaceable. It's looking at yourself and asking, if I were truly unforgettable, would she have gone back? That question seeps like poison into your mind, corroding your confidence, driving you to compare yourself with a ghost that keeps coming back. And yet, this experience can become the most powerful turning point of your life, because it reveals something crucial. You're not fighting another man, you're fighting her unconscious patterns. If you don't understand this, you'll be dragged into the same cycle, being the temporary rest, the comfortable shoulder, the pause before the relapse. But if you grasp the psychological and energetic root of this behavior, then rejection stops being a personal burden and becomes a map. You stop asking, why didn't she choose me? And start asking, what keeps her tied to him? That shift not only gives your power back, it frees you from the illusion that everything depends on your performance. That's the key. It's not about competing with her past, but about understanding why the past still has power. Because the woman who goes back to her ex isn't really running toward him. She's running toward a feeling she lost. Intensity, tension, raw desire. And when she doesn't find that in you, the scale tips backward. Throughout this script, we'll dive deep into these hidden patterns. We'll decode what's really happening when she returns, not by what she says, but by what her unconscious reveals. You'll understand why so many men are discarded as mere interludes, and how to avoid falling into that invisible role. Because in the end, it's not about her going back to her ex. It's about you no longer being the comfortable substitute and becoming the man she can never forget. The wound of invisible substitution. You believed you were opening a new chapter with her. The signs seemed clear: deep conversations, shared laughter, moments of intimacy that suggested genuine closeness. You thought, this time it's different. But then came the brutal revelation. She wasn't free. She wasn't fully with you. What looked like a beginning was, in reality, just a pause, an emotional truce before she returned to the same cycle she had never truly left. This shock awakens an ancient, almost archetypal wound, the masculine fear of being nothing more than a substitute. Not a man who leaves a lasting mark, but a patch used to temporarily cover the void left by another. You don't see yourself as her choice, but as her interlude. And that touches something deep. The sense that your presence doesn't carry enough weight to alter her trajectory. You are company, not destination. And what does this wound generate in you? Confusion. You begin to ask yourself, where did I go wrong? What was missing in me? Why did she prefer the past over a future with me? This spiral of doubt is the perfect ground for losing your power, because without realizing it, you hand over your energy by trying to compare yourself to someone who isn't even winning by merit. but by unconscious attachment. Female psychology shows that often this return is not rational. It's not about making a list of qualities and deciding who is better. It's about an invisible attachment, an emotional thread that still ties her body and mind to her ex. For you, it feels unfair. You offer stability, presence, genuine intention. But for her, the unconscious speaks louder. It's like a magnet pulling her back, even against her logical sense. The problem is that for a man, this feels like absolute invalidation. You gave yourself honestly, believing it would be enough. But then you discover that your devotion wasn't strong enough to free her from the shadow of the past. That's when the poison creeps in, the feeling of uselessness, the idea that you don't matter. And that's the wound that destroys the most. Not the rejection itself, but the erasure. Carl Jung described that what we don't confront within ourselves repeats in our relationships. This dynamic, when left unexamined, echoes throughout your life. You attract women still trapped in previous stories because your own need to prove your worth finds in them the stage to replay this internal battle. But here's the revelation. The fact that she went back to her ex is not proof of your inadequacy. It's proof that you stepped into a role already scripted, the role of the replaceable man. And this role cannot be undone by trying to be more than the ex. It ends when you realize you should never have been competing on that ground in the first place. The wound of substitution only becomes deadly when you take it as your personal truth. When you understand it belongs to her pattern, not to your value as a man, you reclaim your power. Because in the end, it doesn't matter if she goes back to her ex. What matters is whether you accept remaining as the invisible substitute or decide to become the man who doesn't just occupy space, but leaves a mark, the chemical bond of shared trauma. Have you ever wondered why a woman goes back to someone who has hurt her countless times? At first glance, it seems irrational. You offer peace, care, stability, yet she still runs toward the fire that already burned her. This happens because many relationships don't survive on love alone. They survive on the chemistry of trauma. Every heated argument, every breakup followed by reconciliation, every tear turned into a night of passion forges a powerful neurochemical bond. Her body has grown accustomed to living in extremes. Dopamine when he reappears, cortisol when he rejects her, adrenaline during conflict. This cycle works like an addiction. It doesn't matter if it hurts. Her body craves the next dose. Without realizing it, you end up competing not against a man, but against a substance. The ex isn't just a person. He is the dealer of the emotional drug she's hooked on. That's why your calm and predictability, though healthy, can feel pale compared to the chaotic intensity of her past. To her, the absence of drama feels like the absence of passion. And here lies the trap for you, believing you must amplify your intensity to match his. Many men fall into this mistake, trying to reproduce the same highs and lows, convinced that this is how they'll keep her attention. But that path is self-destructive, because you're not being authentic. You're simply adapting to an addiction that isn't yours. Neuroscience shows that relationships marked by cycles of rupture and reconciliation operate much like a loop of chemical dependency. When she goes back to her ex, it isn't just nostalgia or desire. It's because her body demands a return to the pattern it knows. That pattern is addictive. Her brain has built deep associations between pain and pleasure, making it nearly impossible to separate the two. The cruelest part is how this translates for you. Personal rejection. You think, she didn't choose me because I wasn't enough. But in reality, she isn't choosing consciously at all. She's obeying a biological command, programmed through years of conditioning. That's why so many men feel like they can never compete, because it isn't a fair competition. You're offering presence while she's chasing intensity. You're offering security while her body is demanding the storm. But here's the clarity. The problem isn't you. The problem is that she mistakes adrenaline for love. And until she breaks that pattern, any man who enters her life will only be a pause between relapses. The real power lies not in becoming more like the ex, but in refusing to play the chemical game. Because the man who refuses to enter the cycle silently exposes the prison she lives in. He doesn't compete with the addiction. He becomes the reference point for something entirely different. And when she finally grows tired of the intoxication, it's that reference that will echo, the reflection of the first masculine power. There is something rooted in the feminine unconscious that many men ignore. The first masculine impact remains as a shadow. The ex is often not just a man. He is the memory of the first power she ever felt coming from the opposite sex, and that initial impact creates a mark that rarely disappears. It's not about his objective qualities, looks, status, intelligence. It's about unconscious symbolism. He was the first to awaken in her the mix of desire and vulnerability. The first time she experienced the magnetism of surrendering to someone and feeling overtaken by a force greater than reason. That moment plants roots in the psyche, like the imprint of the first fire that warms and burns at the same time. Even if he hurt her, even if the relationship was toxic, he remains as an archetype. Jung said the unconscious operates through symbols, and the first man to provoke genuine intensity becomes a symbol, more than a real person. That's why, when she goes back to her ex, it isn't necessarily about him as an individual. It's about the sensation he represents. It's the attempt to relive the original emotion, to return to the beginning of the journey where everything felt new and overwhelming. For you, this is devastating, because while you offer consistency and presence, she is chasing a reflection that doesn't belong to the present, but to memory. It's like competing with a ghost, an idealized version of the past that exists only inside her. You can never win on that battlefield because you're not fighting flesh and blood. You're facing an archetype. The average man reacts by trying to be more striking, more daring, more intense, believing this will leave his own mark. But the harder he tries, the deeper he falls into the trap of comparison. He forgets that his role is not to imitate the first impact. His role is to transcend it. And how do you transcend? Not by trying to erase the memory, but by becoming a completely different experience. While the X represents chaotic intensity, you must represent transformative depth. While the X was the first spark, you can be the flame that endures. It's another frequency, and that one that doesn't compete but replaces. The reflection of the first masculine power only holds dominance as long as you see it as a threat. Once you realize you don't have to fight the ghost but simply create a new reality that doesn't depend on comparisons, you gain sovereignty. She may go back to her ex many times, but in the end, what truly marks her isn't who lit the first spark. It's who builds the fire that never goes out. The silent test of replaceability. When a woman goes back to her ex, it's often not just about desire or nostalgia. It's also a hidden silent test that most men never notice. Unconsciously, she's asking, "Are you capable of marking me so deeply that I'll never look back?" This is the brutal test of replaceability. It's not declared in words, but expressed through actions. When she walks away, she measures the impact you left. If you were only comfort, if you merely filled an empty space, she won't hesitate to return to the past. But if you left an unmistakable mark, if your presence created an emotional fracture she cannot erase, then the ex loses his grip. The problem is that most men misunderstand this process. They see her leaving as a personal failure and start begging, explaining, trying to win her back with desperate gestures. But every display of desperation confirms the exact opposite of what she's testing, that you are replaceable, that your presence isn't sovereign but dependent on her approval. Relationship psychology shows that people tend to value what feels scarce and transformative. If you react to loss with desperation, you reveal abundance of need, of fragility. But if you react with firmness, as a man who doesn't need to beg to be remembered, you create the opposite, scarcity of yourself. That's what leaves a mark. This test isn't fair. It's cruel because it happens in silence. She doesn't say, "I need to feel you're unforgettable so I won't go back." She simply acts, observes, and concludes. And without realizing it, you've already been judged. What separates the men who pass this test from those who fail isn't external performance. It's internal structure. The man who refuses to be replaceable doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't chase. He doesn't compete with the past. He understands that if she can't recognize the value of his presence, he doesn't need to convince her. His posture speaks louder than any argument, and this posture creates a paradoxical mark. Precisely when you refuse to cling, that's when she feels she cannot let go. That's the unconscious game. When you accept being an interval, she treats you as an interval. But when you stand as a destination, not through words but through attitude, she feels the difference. The test of replaceability cannot be won by trying to be remembered. It can only be won when you, in essence, become impossible to replace. And that doesn't come from grand gestures, but from a silent conviction. You don't compete for space. You are the space. The cruel revelation. She doesn't run back to her ex, but away from your emptiness. It's easy to believe that when she goes back to her ex, she's choosing the past over you. But the truth is even harsher. Many times, she isn't running toward him. She's running away from the emptiness she feels by your side. That's the most painful point to face. Because it means it's not just about what the other man represents, but about what you failed to awaken. When she doesn't find in you the intensity, the creative tension, the emotional leadership her unconscious desires, she seeks in the past the memory of when she once felt it, even if it was toxic, even if it hurt. The psychology of desire shows that attraction doesn't grow out of comfort. It's born from the friction between safety and unpredictability. The ex may have been unstable, even destructive, but he provoked in her the feeling of being alive. You, on the other hand, by offering only stability without mystery, may have become too predictable, and predictability without magnetism breeds boredom. Here's the silent judgment. It's not that you weren't enough as a man, but that your energy didn't move her off balance. You treated her with honesty, maybe even devotion, but without realizing it, you fell into the trap of being too good in the wrong sense. And too good often means emotionally neutral. The cruel truth of this dynamic is that she doesn't go back to her ex because he's better. She goes back because her unconscious associates intensity with him, and the absence of it with you. That doesn't mean you should become chaos. It means that if you don't understand the duality between firmness and provocation, between safety and magnetism, you'll always be seen as the comfortable substitute. Here's the shift. It's not about imitating the ex or competing with the past. It's about elevating your presence to a level where emptiness naturally disappears. This requires awareness, not performance. It requires you to become the man who leads, who generates movement, who sparks her curiosity, who creates tension without losing balance. Because at the core, what keeps her tied to the ex isn't love, but the memory of intensity. And if you don't create intensity, she'll search in the past for what the present doesn't provide. That's the cruel mirror. Every return to him isn't just about him, but about what you failed to awaken. But once you understand this, the game changes. You stop seeing her return as a personal betrayal and start recognizing it as a symptom of the lack of magnetism you haven't yet accessed within yourself. And when you unlock that power, when you become the experience she cannot forget, then no ex can compete. In the end, she isn't running back to her ex. She's running away from the absence of impact. The question is, will you keep being the emptiness, or will you become the presence she cannot abandon? In the silence of every rejection, there is a truth few men dare to face. She didn't go back to her ex because he's better. She went back because inside her there is an invisible thread that hasn't been cut yet. A thread woven from chemistry, memory, and impact. You were honest, present, dedicated. But for her, that wasn't enough to replace him. Not because you are lesser, but because you didn't position yourself as impossible to forget. That is the core of everything we've explored so far. The wound of invisible substitution revealed the cruel blow of discovering you weren't the destination, but the interval. The chemical bond of trauma showed that what ties her to the ex often isn't love, but addiction. The reflection of the first masculine power exposed the symbolic mark of the man who lit the first flame. The silent test of substitutability made it clear that she's always evaluating whether you marked her in a definitive way. And finally, the cruel revelation showed that her return isn't really to him. It's away from the emptiness she felt by your side. Do you see the thread connecting all these points? It's not about the other man. It never was. It's about you understanding the unconscious dynamics that govern her desires. Because as long as you believe you're competing against someone else, you'll keep fighting a losing war. The battle isn't against her ex. It's against the absence of impact, against her emotional addiction, against your own blindness to the silent game being played. And here lies the great reversal. The power was never in her hands nor in his. It has always been in yours. What was missing wasn't more effort, more proof, more words. What was missing was awareness. The awareness that you should never submit to the role of substitute. The awareness that magnetism isn't begged for, it's embodied. The awareness that intensity isn't imitated. It's created through presence, emotional leadership, and firmness. Most men spend their entire lives begging for recognition, as if they could convince a woman to feel something that was never born inside her. They live in function of her desire, forgetting that genuine attraction isn't begged for, it's imposed by the way you stand. You should never be the temporary relief the rest stop between relapses. You must be the definitive mark, the one who shifts the axis. And here comes the question that defines your next step. Will you keep being the emptiness she tries to fill? Or will you become the presence she cannot abandon? That question isn't answered with words, but with inner transformation. Because only when you understand that you don't need to compete, don't need to prove, don't need to beg, do you begin to be seen as rare. Jung said that what you deny turns against you. If you deny your own shadow, your anger, your intensity, your raw desire, she will run to someone who embodies it, even destructively. But if you integrate your shadow, if you learn to balance firmness with mystery, stability with magnetism, then you become whole. And a woman never runs from a whole man. Maybe until now you've been the substitute. Maybe you've felt that pain more than once, but pain is not a sentence. It's initiation. Every time she goes back to her ex, life is telling you, you still haven't understood the game. And the day you do, the pattern breaks. Because you'll no longer accept the role of a provisional man. You'll only accept to be remembered as definitive. Rejection then ceases to be a wound and becomes a compass. It points to what you still haven't embodied. And if you have the courage to look within, you'll realize you don't need to compete with ghosts. You just need to become what no ghost can erase. In the end, she doesn't run to her ex. She runs to the intensity that's missing. And if you learn to become that intensity, not through chaos but through conscious presence, then no return will ever be possible. Because you will no longer be the man who simply occupies space. You'll be the man who creates destiny.